Beyond that, she bathes more than once a year and is not surrounded by a cloud of flies, something I found to be most refreshing after having known Yuheen. And thus we now know the story of the psychopath, Lord Ironfist. Originally released September of 1995 for Microsoft DOS, the successor to King's Bounty, which I've reviewed for the Amiga. Today we are covering Heroes of Might and Magic. It was developed and published by New World Computing, and the last Might and Magic title in which that could be said, because after this, 3DO would start publishing them as they had bought New World. Two ports would be made, one to Windows 95 and one to the Macintosh, both of them in 1996. Today we are covering the original DOS release on actual hardware, but they are all identical. The game carries the Might and Magic moniker, although it really should have been called the King's Bounty 2. It has much more in common with King's Bounty than the Might and Magic series, at least at this point in time. But I would like to start things off with an actual connection to the Might and Magic series via Prima's official strategy guide for Might and Magic 6. The Might and Magic game series, which debuted in 1984 with Might and Magic Book 1, The Secret of the Inner Sanctum, is one of the preeminent success stories in the computer role-playing genre. Worldwide sales of the entire series is over 5 million units, and most gamers who were playing games in the early and mid-1980s remember fondly the series' first installment. As World of Zine stampeded off retailer shelves, John Van Canham, series creator and president of New World Computing, decided to take a hiatus from the CRPG genre. Specifically, he wanted to go back to one of his first loves, turn-based strategy. Because the underpinnings of the Might and Magic story remained ripe with possibilities, he seized on the idea of developing a game that combined all its role-playing potential with combat tactics and adventuring strategy. Thus, Heroes of Might and Magic: A Strategic Quest was born. In this fest of the sci-fi meets fantasy world of the Kron spacecraft, the player, as Lord Ironfist, must defeat the lords of the surrounding fiefdoms to assume the throne and rule the land of Inroth. A bit of a peculiar connection, but a connection nonetheless. There is no mention of the Kron spacecraft in any of the Heroes titles. There are no sci-fi elements at all in this spin-off. I think a missed opportunity. I know a lot of people don't like the science fiction elements of Might and Magic, but as far as I'm concerned, it's an essential ingredient, and if you don't like it, please go to most other role-playing games and leave this franchise alone. Heroes is a strategy/RPG. Like its predecessor, it is more strategy than role-playing, but it has that element there. It goes further than King's Bounty did with the role-playing, but the marriage that Heroes 2 and 3 would provide, it's not quite there yet. There are a few reasons I say that, but the primary one is the story, which is definitely the worst part of this entire game. It's pretty much the only thing, really, I can criticize the game for. The story is awful. You have established a foothold in this land. There are other lords around you. Get rid of them. Rinse and repeat for every single scenario. For the most part, you might have a brief respite by going to fetch a certain artifact or something, but even then, it's go fetch this item and the rest of the lords will respect you or something. It's very, very thin. The manual goes further in the story development, although of what little story there is in the actual game, it directly conflicts with the manual's telling. Letters from Lord Ironfist, 23rd day of the month of the Raven, common year 632, to my great and magnificent lord, King Ragnar, from his loyal cousin, Lord Ironfist. Greetings. It has been 30 days since I crossed through the mysterious gate which opened in the Varna Hills, and thus found myself in this strange and uncharted land. I wish, my dear lord and cousin, through this missive to dispel the ugly rumors about me, which I fear you might believe. I was deeply shocked, dear cousin, by the attempt of the wizard Guthart to slay you. I heard that upon the wreck of pain, shortly after you had his arms torn from their sockets, that he cried out my name as the one who had paid him. Dear cousin, it has injured me grievously to hear that you believed him, even though you took the hand of the fair Ewine to be your queen. though I loved her dearly. Still, it is wrong to think I would wish harm upon you. I am deeply hurt to hear it being said that I fled like a coward up into the Varnell Hills to escape your justice. I was merely going on a hunting expedition, dear cousin. Please extend to the Lady Uween my warmest thoughts and tell her I have many fond memories of times I spent with her. She'll know what I mean. Cousin, it's been more than 2 years since I sent my last missive up into the hills to be placed near the gate where I first came through into this world. I embarked on my expedition to explore new lands and have endured 2 long and hard years of campaigning. After wandering for many weeks, I came at last upon another town. It was there I discovered much about this land. The town I had thus taken was a barbarian town. It was filled with creatures unique to such a place. There I brought into my service more orcs, wolves, ogres, and trolls, along with a powerful cyclops. I found out as well that there are many other towns scattered about the lands. By the way, do ask me about the interesting time we once had and both fondly remember as the Night of Madness. I have found that though a paladin was indeed a mighty warrior, he was, as they say, burnt toast when confronting an army with dragons. I shall work hard in these areas, and then all shall tremble before me. I am curious to know, is Ewing's breath as disgusting as I now remember it to be? It has been 5 years since my last missive. I can imagine how things must fare you there, sitting fat and blotted like a corrupt spider upon your cheap web of a throne, which you wrongfully assumed and which you have wrongfully held. So now, Ragnar the Pig, I own all this land of heroes. All creatures within it acknowledge me as the rightful king. I shall rule it with justice and wisdom. Let me add here that I view it as fortunate now that the fool Gerthor failed so miserably in his attempt on your life. If the plot had succeeded, I would have been but a petty lord in a petty realm, which is all that you now have. Your father murdered his brother, my father, to take the throne, and then you took it from him. This shall be the last of the letters I will post to the gate. If you hear from me again, it will be because the gate is opened, and I shall come through it, sword in hand, seeking justice. P.S. If Eween is still with you, tell her I have married and am quite content. My companion has all the attributes that she did not: trustworthiness, intelligence, beauty, and kindness. Beyond that, she bathes more than once a year and is not surrounded by a cloud of flies, something I find to be most refreshing after having known Eween. And thus we now know the story of the psychopath, Lord Ironfist. While I feel its inclusion makes for an entertaining segment of this review, the story is an awful disappointment. The bulk of the story is actually told as an in-universe way to describe game mechanics, which I cannot stand. I came upon this town of barbarians with cyclopses. I have heard that there's the warlock town in which the mighty dragon appears. That is stuff that should be just explained matter-of-factually in the manual with lists and stats and stuff, and which it does contain that in the manual. So why do you insist on telling it through the story a second time? And I have to tell you, on a personal note, I started with the second game in the Heroes franchise first, and having, experienced that story and coming back to this one to basically learn that the father of these 2 children in the second game, Archibald and Roland the good brother, and Archibald the not so good brother, to learn that in reality Archibald probably should have been the canonical character because he is far more like his actual father, to learn that the father in the first one was an absolute awful person. It makes me glad I did not choose Lord Ironfist for this playthrough. So the story is the worst part of the game, but thankfully, as a strategy game, there are far more important things. Though as an RPG as well, the mix strategy/RPG, it has to be noted that the story, it's not my favorite part of this game. From November of 1995, computer game Strategy Plus. After seemingly losing their way with a series of below-average products, New World Computing have stormed back with the long-awaited Heroes of Might and Magic, a true hybrid of strategy and role-playing game that works equally well as either. It's a beautiful game, graphically and orally, and it's so easy to play that any gamer should be able to navigate the entire game in a matter of minutes. Some players will notice bits of the brilliant Warlord series here and there, but anyone who's played New World's underrated King's Bounty circa 1990 will feel right at home. This is in many ways a supercharged version of that game, adding more depth and what is perhaps the finest interface in any strategy game. The combat in the design is where perhaps hardcore strategy fans may be slightly let down. You cannot stack units or attack with more than one hero, though you can exchange troops between heroes. There's very little you can do to flank an opponent due to the small size of the combat area. Now, the first thing with that review is he says that the game works equally well as either a strategy game or an RPG. The RPG element is there. Here we got the Witch's Brooch, which adds to our magic ability. We get experience. We gain attack levels, and spell levels, wisdom levels, defense levels. Our heroes, they grow. There is role-playing there, but then they're gone. The second you defeat a given scenario, the slate is wiped clean, and you start from scratch all over. And these are areas which would be improved in the upcoming games, where you could, in certain scenarios, have your previous heroes go forward with their armies. And when they didn't progress, they gave you options. Do you want to start this given scenario with the Knight's Town or the Sorceress's Town? Would you like to start with extra gold or extra resources? This increases the role-playing profoundly, but this original title, it's lacking in those areas. It is greatly enhanced by what role-playing is there, but the strategy is where this game is at. The magazine mentioned the combat as an area in where perhaps strategy fans may not be satisfied. I love this combat system. Now, lots of strategy games have excellent combat systems. It's an incredibly important part of that genre. So you may prefer a different game's combat system. That is utterly fine, but I do not think strategy gamers are the kind to just say, this is better or this is worse. No, this is different, and it's wonderful because it's different. And perhaps the best part of this combat system is that it's 1995 and it's still turn-based. Thank you for not just being like everybody else and doing the real-time thing. I think the success of this franchise in 1995, when King's Bounty, the previous incarnation, wasn't so successful, may have had quite a bit to do with the fact that it was turn-based in an era when everybody insisted on being real-time. I don't think it's a coincidence that a series like this, which continues to be released, and a game like Civilization, another turn-based game which continues to get releases, that's not a coincidence that they're turn-based. We'll talk more about the combat, but first, back to the magazine's electronic entertainment from January of 1995. Which featured an advertisement for a game which would not even be released for many, many months. Not until the end of 1995 would this game be released, and it's actually just the back of a box, as a matter of fact. The realms of Might and Magic are expanding. New lands have been discovered, and you must vie for their control against 3 other warlords. Now is the time to summon your heroes, recruit your armies, and lead them to victory. Control every resource in your empire, from your castles, docks, and guilds to your archers, dragons, and ogres. Keep a level head and an iron fist as you strive for total domination in the world of heroes of Might and Magic. Speaking of the box, there's the front of it for you. Now, this is a preview, and it's an interesting one because there are several little differences here, like the character portraits are not the same. The interface is a little different, and they talk about certain things, like if you skip a couple of payments, your troops will desert you, which was a feature in King's Bounty, one I was not a fan of, and it is not in this game, but apparently originally it was. The choices are many, and there is no single route to victory. One reason is because the lands appear differently every time you play. The towns, artifacts, resources, and perils are randomly redistributed with each new game. This makes it feel like, again, this was supposed to be closer to King's Bounty. That is not how the game actually is. The artifacts are distributed randomly, but the towns and resources are all planned. They're exactly the same every time you play. Whatever you do, one thing is sure. You'll really appreciate the colorful, detailed graphics lavished on Heroes of Might and Magic. The game screens have the flat but brilliant look of a medieval tapestry. Despite a rash of new strategy games, it's safe to say none approach the visual distinction of Heroes of Might and Magic. Playing it is so rewarding you won't even notice the next installment of the Might and Magic saga won't be ready for another year or so. Gameplay, 5 out of 5 stars. Value, 5 out of 5 stars. This strategy-based fantasy conquest game sports incredible graphics, terrific gameplay, and great replayability. And Electronic Entertainment would come back to the game in December of 1995 after it had actually been released. But first, a little gaming culture of the time period. The war is over. We won. The PC entertainment industry has finally come to a realization. Games, at least for the moment, rule the roost. How do I know this? It's obvious. Not only are game makers spending money at a record-breaking pace to create even hotter, more spectacular games, but some of the most die-hard multimedia companies, even Grolier and Compton's New Media, are joining the fray. Well, I have no doubt that titles defined as multimedia will succeed at some level. I just don't see multimedia ever overtaking gaming as the dominant form of computer-based entertainment. Oh, there'll always be exceptions. After all, half the country watched the Civil War series, but gaming will always rule, and for gamers, that's not such a bad thing. This isn't the first time we've reviewed Heroes of Might and Magic. I wrote about the pre-release version. Unfortunately, the game was delayed several months, and it's just now hitting the streets. Was it worth the wait? In a word, yes. Each scenario contains many paths to success and failure. For example, you get to decide what buildings to purchase for each castle you own and what monster or armies to build. Do you buy a knightly hero with defensive advantages and better morale during battle, or go with a spellcasting sorceress? Choose well, because each choice affects the final confrontation with your surviving enemies. The game's visuals are great, including stunning Super VGA. Though with limited animation, Heroes of Might and Magic's music is just as good, consisting of a series of well-crafted, Baroque-influenced compositions that I'd listen to on their own. This winner should please strategy and fantasy fans like Barry Brenacel, and the ratings have even increased from the preview. As they had mentioned the graphics, it would be an appropriate time to discuss them. Here, I feel Heroes is a gorgeous game. Now, I'm familiar with the series up to and including the third game, and each one has their own distinct style, and they're all graphically appealing, including King's Bounty. And not only for their time, but artistically forever. I would actually completely respect anybody who says blank game happens to be their favorite in the franchise because of the graphical style. My favorite happens to be the second game because it's, it's more zoomed out, smaller. You get more of an encompassing kind of a feel there, but it still retains, this pixel art kind of hand-drawn style as this first one. And the second favorite is this one right here. Here it's more zoomed in, especially for the combat. So if you like nice and big creatures, this is your game. They are wonderfully drawn. And my least favorite actually is the third game. I like the way the third game looks, but because it has a 3D kind of thing to it, I don't like that style. It doesn't age as well as these ones do, in my opinion. So graphically speaking, this is my second favorite of the franchise, and utterly understand anybody who thinks this is the best looking. It's completely understandable artistically. And the only bad thing about these bigger drawn characters is the fact that you only have so much room for them in the combat screens. There's definitely less room for actual creatures, and thus less room for strategy and flanking and stuff like that, because of how huge these characters are. Now, as we finish this scenario and go on to the next ones, we get to see a little bit of this very disappointing story. They've fallen, they've abandoned their castles and fled, yet there's still going to be many more castles that they will occupy. However, I will state that, again, the story is nothing to write home about, but the actual scenarios, the way they change them up here, we are going to be on a series of islands, and we're going to use our boats which were an extraordinarily important thing in King's Bounty, much less so in this one, but here we get to use them, and they are fun to use, especially in this one where everybody is just once everybody else gets on those boats and just starts flying everywhere, the strategy element really gets exciting. People can travel quite a distance in those boats, and before you know it, some castle that you do not have occupied is going to be ripe for the taking. Quite a lot of fun. These scenarios, at least in the first half of the game, love them. Computer Gaming World, December of 1995. Survey says Computer Gaming World is #1. It's one thing to say you're the best computer gaming magazine, but it's another to have independent results that prove it. The results of the survey, taken from 1,167 completed questionnaires, offer a pretty good portrait of who computer gamers are and what they want. First of all, it comes as no surprise that most respondents are male, 95%. And though they like to play a lot of games, they aren't kids. The average age is 31. 65% of the respondents said they are regular readers of Computer Gaming World, compared to under 25% for the next closest competitor. When it comes to which gaming genre seems to be the most popular, no one category emerged as a clear favorite. Slightly more gamers are interested in simulations than anything else, but there were also a strong representation for war games, strategy games, role-playing games, and sports games. The least popular among respondents were adventure, arcade action, puzzle games, and the often disappointing educational products. And keep in mind, this is an American computer perspective. Obviously, the console world is going to have very different tastes, as well as over in Europe, they're going to have different games that they're going to like. But here, this is actually how it was. When the smoke clears, only heroes remain. And you can definitely see the shift towards the online world at this point, which all of these quotes are from people at AOL.com. It first shows up in the Holiday Hot 100 as #6 for strategy. This wonderful game from New World Computing is a great wargaming strategy hybrid with elements of role-playing as well. The graphics are beautiful and the worlds you explore are all extensive and blacked out, waiting for discovery. This is that rare hybrid game that will appeal to first-time gamers and veterans alike. 69.95. May the best Warlord win. From Jason Kauraka. It's hard to believe, but sometimes we reviewers get lazy. Oh, I believe it. Instead of evaluating a game on its own merits, we'll take the high-concept shortcut and describe it in terms of earlier titles, which he then does quite extensively, but claims it's necessary. Strangely, the one game series Heroes doesn't bring to mind are the actual Might and Magic RPGs. Beyond the title, there is practically no relation. If not for copyright lawyers, Heroes of Might and Magic could as easily have been called Heroes of Ultima, Heroes of Wizardry, or Heroes of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Games that borrow heavily from earlier successes often end up as bizarre, unplayable pastiches, but Heroes is a pleasant surprise, bringing its disparate elements together into a satisfying whole. It may not get many points for originality, but it's undeniably one of the most entertaining and addictive strategy games to come down the turnpike in some time. It may also be the prettiest and most accessible. In fact, the game's bright SVGA graphics, charming music, and simple mechanics may lead some to underestimate it. The combat sequences are where the game's SVGA graphics really shine. There are nearly 30 different monster types, ranging from insufferably cute sprites to grotesque trolls to clanking armor-clad paladins, all gorgeously animated as they sprint, crawl, lumber, or soar into the fray. For all its simplicity and graphic flash, the game's structure is elegant enough to leave room for tactical brilliance or blunders. Missile units like archers and elves can chew up powerful slow creatures like trolls long before they can close to melee range, but on the other hand are useless if pulled into hand-to-hand combat by swift-moving flyers. The AI actually lives up to its name for once. Even on normal settings, the computer foes generally use sound tactics in battle and display considerable canniness on the strategic level. If there's a fault with this otherwise excellent game, it lies in the lack of a map randomizer or editor. Taken as a whole, Heroes of Might and Magic is probably one of the best war games for people who hate war games yet released. Even diehard grognards who turn their noses at fantasy fluff may get a kick out of it if they can just pull themselves away from their panzers for a while. 5 out of 5 stars. Great graphics and sound, easy to learn interface, involving gameplay, strong computer opponents, multiplayer capabilities, lots of neat stuff. What more could you want? Cons not as endlessly replayable as a Panzer General, and the game lacks the depth of Master of Magic. Manual could be a bit more informative. to expand upon how Computer Game World said that it could have just easily been called Heroes of Ultima. Yes, I obviously already stated that earlier. It's King's Bounty. Using the Might and Magic name has been done to get attention. It's hard to blame them considering how misunderstood of a game King's Bounty was. It was not well reviewed despite being this game in essence. They didn't understand it at the time, I guess. And I guess it can be forgiven considering the Hero series is so wonderful. But at the same time, historically, I guess I want to note that this is the beginning of the complete shilling of the Might and Magic franchise. We had Might and Magic, then we had Heroes of Might and Magic, which had nothing to do with Might and Magic. Then we had Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, Crusaders of Might and Magic, Legends of Might and Magic, blah 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 of Might and Magic, all with the name just so it would sell, having nothing to do with Might and Magic. And in terms of gaming culture, that is an awful thing. Be made better through the Might and Magic series, because Might and Magic 6 would incorporate characters and settings from Heroes 2. And again, Might and Magic 7 would incorporate characters and settings from Heroes 3. But the actual Heroes series never really did incorporate much from Might and Magic. Great game, misleading name. Let's talk about some gameplay. There are two different types of combat: field combat and castle siege. When your hero encounters an enemy hero or town without a castle, you enter field combat, which is fairly self-explanatory. We have an army made up of stacks of troops. It attacks another army. Now, we get these troops primarily through castle building. Through gold and resources, we buy a nest, which produces griffins. And some of these, are connected to each other. So you can't have a maze without the crypt. You can't have the dragons without the maze and the swamp. Now, beyond the castle creatures, we also have miscellaneous dwellings, which might be located on a given map, and they're usually very useful. Now, the rogue, for example, his defense is very low. So if something attacks him, they will get hurt. But there's usually quite a bit of them, and they don't cost that much. So you can buy like 50 of them when you get there, and their attack skill is quite good. Finding them early on in a scenario will usually be a good thing for you. Which lord you choose at the beginning of the game primarily affects how each scenario will start. So Lord Ironfist is the knight. So you will start with the knight's castle, with the peasants, the paladins, pikemen, those types of units. We chose Lord Alamar for this playthrough, so we are starting with the Warlock town. So we start with the Centaur, not such a great creature, but we eventually get the dragon, the most powerful creature in the game. Now, any of these lords can recruit any type of hero they want. Each has their own advantages. So the Warlock can also recruit a barbarian hero. Barbarians don't have any penalties moving over like rough terrain, so snow, desert, and then a sorceress will travel over water faster. So, keep these things in mind. In each town, you can also build several layers of Mage Guild, which will give you access to different spells. Obviously, a sorceress or a warlock is going to have a better initial ability with magic, but even a knight can learn those skills. Spells are separated into either overland or combat categories. We have the Great Meteor Shower, Fireball, Lightning Bolt, Paralyze, etc. Great spells for combat, but even in the overland we get spells like Dimension Door, which will let you portal yourself into a different square. Very useful, some of these spells. And how will we choose to prioritize things? Because you can't just do everything. It's usually a risk-reward type of situation. If we want the best magical spells, well, we have to get lots of different resources. Sulfur, gem, mercury, crystals, essential to growing the Mage Guild. Sulfur, essential to getting the dragon, as well as gold. This is the greatness of Heroes as a strategy game. I've heard people describe certain heroes as easy mode or stuff like that. They'll say the Warlock is the easy mode. They'll say the Knight is the hard mode. That's not how my experience was. They're not looking at it from a strategic perspective. Yes, the Warlock has the dragon. They also have the weakest creatures before the dragon. Getting the resources necessary to procure the dragon is time-consuming, more so than any other major creature. And prioritizing that has the consequence of you're probably not going to be able to get many Mage Guild levels. The Knight will have the weakest top-tiered creatures like the Cavalier and Paladin. That is described as hard mode by some people. And yes, if you let the Warlock get a bunch of dragons against you, or the Sorceress with the Phoenix, your Paladins will be decimated. However, the Knight also has the cheapest route to getting the top-tiered creatures. You can get them all pretty much within a week. You adjust your strategy and you go head first into the enemy with the Knight, and it turns out it's actually very easy when you do it that way. Everything is designed lovingly to offer strategic challenge. Now, we have that Hydra there, for example. All the rest of my armies are destroyed, but I still got those Hydras. Very tough creatures, and they can attack from all sides. I can do the Armageddon spell, and they will survive that, but they're incredibly slow. To get them to attack somebody, the entire battle will probably be over before you actually have use for a Hydra most of the time. But maybe instead of getting dragons, you get spells, and then you can use the teleport spell with the Hydras to get them into the action. Each Lord offers you something different. It's not easy or harder, it's different. And it's also a little repetitive as well. Whatever you choose at the beginning of the game, that's how you're starting each scenario. I would have preferred to have had something different. Back to Computer Gaming World, June of 1996, Game of the Year Awards. In the Reader's Top 10 of what have they been playing lately, Heroes of Might and Magic comes in at number 6. And another reader poll of the top games, number 4 for top strategy games, Heroes of Might and Magic. The past year has seen a number of games destined to follow in the footsteps of titles like Falcon, Sid Meier's Civilization, and Mule. These programs, too, will someday be considered classics. Building an empire to span the globe, raising a civilization to stand the test of time, sending an army on a march of destruction that would make the great Khan Genghis jealous. These are goals strategy games reach for. The challenges in the past year have been abundant. We could spend weeks playing any of this year's finalists for Strategy Game of the Year. In fact, the field was so crowded with entertaining games that the award ended in a tie between Command & Conquer and Heroes of Might and Magic. A faint descendant of the classic King's Bounty. Oh, thanks for calling it a classic now, because you sure heck didn't do it originally. And it's not just faint, it's a direct descendant. As you lead your heroes and armies against your enemies, you'll face challenging AI and be forced to take a variety of different strategies to achieve your goals. Heroes will challenge you to think and plan, and will reward you with hours of sheer pleasure. It's one of the most addictive games to come along in years. And we also have a picture of John Van Caneghem, not only the designer of Heroes of Might and Magic, but also New World Computing's president. Quick stop for some gaming memories now as we dig up the Eye of Goros. This is what I remember most about the first time I played this game as Lord Ironfist. And again, at first I was building up my army. I just kept waiting and waiting, getting more troops, which allowed the Warlock to get the Armageddon spell, and he just had his way with me, and I had to restart the scenario from the beginning and charge forth, and that's how I ended up winning eventually. Which is why I chose the Warlock this time. I wanted to enact my revenge by being the one with that spell. Now this is where the game kind of bogged down for me. The game's scenarios, which have been good to this point, not really in the story, but in terms of the actual map design, they've all been unique to some extent. This is just the first scenario with more distance between everybody. Because you are cursed to start every scenario the same way, depending on who you chose at the beginning, it gets a little too samey for me. After this, we go on a series of scenarios which have us confront each individual lord. The map design ends up changing quite a bit to suit that lord. And that, again, the game picks up right after this scenario. November of 96, the 150 best games of all time. Number 133, Heroes of Might and Magic New World, 1995. This award-winning remake of The King's Bounty is a brilliantly balanced game of fantasy combat that quickly becomes addictive. Also on individual editor Terry's 15 best strategy games of all time at number 15. And in this issue, they did a special on various important companies throughout the history of computers, including New World, realizing that the gamers were enamored of the entire concept of fantasy worlds. The plan was devised to bring the characters and monsters of the Might and Magic series to the strategy game genre. Heroes of Might and Magic, a very slick remake of John's earlier The King's Bounty, was the result, and its accolades have been sung far and wide. Computer Game World named it the Strategy Game of the Year for 1995, and it won both PC Gamer's Editor's Choice Award and Computer Game Review's Golden Triad Award. Heroes of Might and Magic blends many of the fantasy elements of role-playing with a solid turn-based strategy wargame engine. Plus, it offers a rich and rewarding campaign game. Now, I would not be putting Heroes of Might and Magic on any intellectual best of lists. You don't put Civilization 2 or 3 on a best of list. You go for the original, and the original is King's Bounty. That is the one I would personally choose for an intellectual best of list. Now, on a personal list, you're going to put in whatever you want. I put in Heroes 2 and 3. And this Computer Gaming World list is presented more intellectually, so here I would have gone for King's Bounty. Now, if you are going to willfully ignore King's Bounty, which is what they were doing, despite actually using the word, although wrongly, it is King's Bounty, not the King's Bounty. Those are not harmless mistakes. They did it multiple times. They did it in the actual best of list, and then they did it later in the New World special. That is ignorance. That is somebody telling you, you probably better mention this game, but you have absolutely no experience with it, so you kind of jot it down, but you jotted it down wrong, and you didn't look into it at all. So if you're going to ignore King's Bounty, first off, actually ignore it and don't mention it. And if you're going to say that the sequels didn't go far enough to distinguish themselves, because a sequel intellectually has to go pretty far above and beyond to get an intellectual placement on a best of list, in my opinion, then I guess I would understand somebody placing this one in there, even though I would say the sequels better this game in every conceivable way, intellectually and personally. And I would also say that intellectually and personally, King's Bounty is a better game than this. Again, it was the first to incorporate many of the features of this game, and as well, it actually has a quest, a purpose. The actual story in the game, although again the story is a very weak part of King's Bounty, but there's more story in the manual and the game. You're on a large quest that spans multiple maps. You build your army throughout these maps. You can travel in between them at any time. It's a large, rewarding campaign that's interconnected with a good or a bad ending. A feature which this game is completely lacking. This is just a bunch of individual scenarios plopped together in what they call a campaign mode. I still have a lot of fun playing it. It's absolutely recommended, but I would recommend King's Bounty and Heroes 2 and 3 a little more. Although I would say that it absolutely deserved to be in the Game of the Year awards for 1995, just not all time. And it's too bad that King's Bounty didn't get any recognition in 1990 Computer Gaming World. Here is Hyper, January of 95, self-described as Australia's best independent games mag. It seems that the old theme of sweaty muscle-bound beefcakes engaged in serious biffo will never die. Here is some more fodder for our hungry fantasy-starved souls. Heroes of Might and Magic carries on the Might and Magic torch into the CD-ROM territory, and things look promising too. I mean, let's face it, the Might and Magic series was okay, but nothing to do backflips about. There was always room for improvement. And the actual gameplay was very repetitive. Well, Heroes of Might and Magic should crap on all that with a combined fantasy RPG strategy biff-fest in full Super VGA, customizable computer foes, dozens of worlds, a huge musical score, and cracking sound effects. Bids well. We'll see. We'll see? So you didn't actually have the game. You just had a couple pictures of it and used this opportunity to crap all over the Might and Magic series. Okay. This is a guy getting his information from like a press release from New World or something. Clearly he has no idea that this game relates to Might and Magic by name only. And he commits one of the worst reviewers' sins by bad-mouthing a completely separate game while covering another. If I read that review at that time and I liked Might and Magic, which I do, not only would I never care about what this idiot says ever again, I would completely dismiss the game he's talking about because why? Well, he likes it and he's a moron. November 1995, PC Gamer. Receiving the PC Gamer Editor Choice Awards. It's not too complex, but here is one of those rare games that simply demands to be played. If you know anything about New World Computing's Might and Magic series, one of computer gaming's most revered role-playing cycles. Oh, but it's nothing to do backflips about, according to Hyper Idiot. You might get the wrong idea about this latest title because Heroes of Might and Magic isn't an RPG at all, but rather a strategy game employing some of the heroic wizards, barbarians, and knights of the series. It really doesn't do that at all. Unless you consider some of the names of the heroes like Crodo to be anything more than an Easter egg, which I do not. Heroes gameplay is easy to understand unless you quickly settle into a groove and enjoy each turn, each move, and each decision for its own sake. Even though it's turn-based, it has all the immediacy of a real-time game, but without that unforgiving timer. The variety of troops available from your run-of-the-mill human peasants and knights to more exotic creatures like cyclops and hydras adds immeasurably to gameplay. Every player will find him or herself preferring one of the 4 character classes in the game. My favorite is the Plains group, with its rock-hurling trolls and fierce cyclops. When you throw in the fact that the location of treasures and artifacts changes each time you load a scenario, you end up with a game that will provide almost limitless replay appeal. No. The graphics sound well, they're both fine, they're not too ambitious, but the look and sound of the characters is certainly part of the game's charm. Besides, gameplay is the star here, and it's the reason Heroes of Might and Magic is a winner. It's engrossing, easy to play, and even easier to get sucked into. You'll find yourself playing for hours at a stretch, and coming back to play again for a long time to come. Ned Gaskins, overall, 88%. Replay value, big pet peeve of mine, and how so many people do not understand what it means. It is a factually based argument. It has nothing to do with how much you personally want to go back to any given game. How much value is there in replaying it? How different is it each time? Sid Meier's titles are the pinnacle. Civilization, Pirates, Railroad Tycoon. Every single time you play them, the game is going to be utterly different. Minecraft today, and while this game, it's never going to be quite the same because it's strategy based, and you don't know what the enemy is going to do, and you don't know what you're going to do, but still, it's scenario based. You have a goal for the scenario. It's it's not a straight linear line, but it's not exactly the peak of replay value. This is a good map to talk about the AI. I'm playing this game on whatever difficulty was the default value. And you can tell, even at this level, that the computer is cheating. Like, they made a beeline direct to my castle. Utterly ignoring the desert areas to the left and the right, they just go straight to your home. It's cheating, but it's fine with me. I've never felt any need to adjust the difficulty settings. What it offers you is a challenge, and you don't feel too cheated. And this happens to be my second favorite map as well. I think my favorite is the Islands map, where we are sailing off, confronting everybody. But here, coming through that desert, going into the snow, and hunting down this barbarian lord. We're in the final stretch here now. Every time you play, you always miss one scenario, depending on who you chose. So we chose Lord Elamar, so we're not going to see the Lord Elamar map, which is actually a pretty cool kind of maze, and it kind of sucks that you have to play through the entirety of the game again just to see the one map that you had missed. Of course, there are also numerous solo maps that you can play through, but I'm a campaign kind of person. I don't think I've ever played any of the solo maps in any of the Heroes games. The second annual PC Gamer Awards, March 1996. Naturally, there were quite a few excellent games that almost wound up with the pulse-pounding honor of receiving a PC Gamer Award. We'd hate to see those games go unrecognized, so here are runners-up for 1995. Each of these games is a gem in its genre, and well worth your gaming time and money. The runners-up for Best Strategy Game, Caesar 2 and Heroes of Might and Magic. PC Review, January 1996. After a string of decent but unspectacular RPGs, the Might and Magic series has changed direction. Though you shouldn't panic. The change is a subtle one. It has nothing to do with Might and Magic, and it's more than a subtle change if it did have a lot to do with Might and Magic. And they would have to panic if indeed this was a continuation of the Might and Magic series. Oh, and FYI, Might and Magic 3, 4, and 5 all won some Game of the Year awards there. The accompanying story is still packed with the worst kind of fantasy cliches. Yeah, you obviously respect fantasy games, don't you? And dozens of characters from the original series make reappearances. Just because a hero has a name attached to it that says Croto or Maximus or something does not mean that characters from the original series are making appearances. There is no story attached to them. What makes Heroes of Might and Magic so enjoyable is its variety. Graded difficulty means there's something here for novices as well as experienced tacticians, and the diversity of opponents' heroes, terrain, scenarios, and surprises keeps you hooked. The action is great from start to finish. A PCR verdict type fantasy adventure. It's a strategy game. Publisher, US Gold over in Europe for £39.99. Occasionally looks a little crude, but overall, a fun strategy game for beginners and experts alike. Score of 7. And although he likes the game, as do I, it's these types of reviews that make it to the top of the crap list for me. If you like this game, great. Talk about what you like about this game. If you don't like this game, talk about what you don't like about this game. You want to mention the Might and Magic series in which it has a name in common with, then talk about the specifics of the Might and Magic series that appear in this game which you like, or the specifics which do not appear, which you like or don't like. Let's hear about some specifics, not dozens of characters that appear from the Might and Magic series. Please name one. Please name one that has anything to do with this game. And know your history. A string of decent but unspectacular RPGs. They all had a Game of the Year award. Give me a break. Next Generation, December of 1995. A new breed of fantasy strategy gaming heroes. Might and Magic is part war game, part adventure, and part sim. It seamlessly captures the best of all three genres and presents the whole package with bright, colorful visuals. This is a game that's easy to learn, but difficult to master. Management of resources is just as important as thoughtful battle strategy, with several scenarios of varying difficulty as well as multiplayer support. It will be a long time before this one leaves your hard drive. 4 stars. In terms of the perspective from back in the day, they all liked it, although I couldn't care less what a couple of them had to say, despite the fact that they liked it because of how they chose to degrade some other games. It won 3 Game of the Year awards. I was only able to find the Computer Gaming World one, though, but it also won for Computer Games Strategy Plus and Inside Mac Games. It had sold over 100,000 units in its first month. The critics liked it. The gamers liked it. I like it. Now, for me, it's more of a pure strategy game with some RPG elements that do enhance the game. I love that there are role-playing elements that we can, get these heroes up some levels and make them more powerful. It doesn't marry the role-playing as well as the next 2 would, and to some extent it doesn't even do it as well as King's Bounty did. But the graphics are like looking at a wondrous painting. The sounds are excellent. Music is okay and definitely marked down because it's in mono, and you can only play it through badly compressed CD audio. There's no MIDI options, which the next game would revert back to. As a strategy game, it has more purpose than most, although it is lacking in the story. As we finish the game and we note the 4 different lords entering the castle, here we see how little the actual manual story has to do with anything. You see the guy on the right with the armor? That was Lord Ironfist. This guy, my heroes. Our foes have been scattered. Their castles broken and laid bare. The great campaign is now complete, and I stand before you as the undisputed High King. That is not Lord Ironfist. That is just King. It's like King's Bounty. We're like saving the king or something. The story that is in the manual and the story that is in the actual game utterly contradict each other. And finally, we have a score-based system based solely on the amount of time it took you to complete the campaign. As you can see, my original playthrough of Lord Ironfist, because I had to go through it quickly, beats out my new one, even though I did a lot more in this one. I am not a fan of rewarding speedrunners. Yes, you can factor in speed, but the more you do, the more your score should be, which was what King's Bounty was. Disappointing that they had to base it solely on how fast you completed the game here. It's a beautiful game which will challenge you, and it's great to have a strategy game in a fantasy realm. Not as recommended from me as King's Bounty for the 16 bits or Heroes 2 and 3, but still a wonderful play. Check out my written review, shot97retro.blogspot.com, my video reviews for King's Bounty, Might Magic 4, Civilization, and Curse of the Azure Bonds.